If you work as a manufacturing facilities engineer, installing a new piece of equipment can be as complex as the machinery itself. From prep work to alignment and testing, it's your team's job to put it all together. That's why it's good to have Grainger on your side. With industrial-grade products and next-day delivery, Grainger helps ensure you have everything you need close at hand through every step of the installation. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. I'm your host, Hannah MacDonald, and I'll be bookending the conversation with some of the most exciting voices from the bookish world. Today on the podcast, I am delighted to be joined by the wonderful Hazel Barkworth to discuss her latest novel, The Drownings, which is out now in paperback and published by Headline Review. It was described by writer and journalist Katie Bishop as an extraordinary story of female power and rage, and honestly, I could not agree more. Hazel Barkworth is a writer and cultural consultant. She studied English at Oxford and is a graduate of both the Oxford University MST in Creative Writing and the Curtis Brown Creative Novel Writing course. Her debut novel, Heatstroke, was published by Headline in 2020 and was a Cosmopolitan Best Book of the Summer. And here to chat about her latest novel, The Drownings, welcome Hazel to A Pair of Bookends.
Hello, lovely to be here.
It's so lovely to have you. Now, what the listeners may or may not know is that we did attempt to record an event that we did at Blackwell's in Manchester, but unfortunately that recording is definitely not usable. You can barely hear us, which is really disappointing because both you and Amy Bichel at that event were wonderful and said so many amazing things about your book and about your research and writing process. And I wish I would have been able to keep hold of that, but alas,
fantastic night.
It was, but you know, technology is against me as usual. So I have got you back, and I am really happy to have you on the podcast. So thank you so much.
It's lovely to be here.
Before we get into your book and your writing journey, I usually open with one of my favourite questions, which is, what are you currently reading?
I'm currently reading and absolutely loving. I'm halfway through and can't wait to get back to it. Kingfisher by Rosie Kelly. I'm doing an event with her next week, which I'm incredibly excited about. And I've just got my hands on the book, and it is it's also much like The Drowning, set in a university. And it is just this sensitive, tender book about tangled, difficult relationships and people making decisions that don't feel like the right ones, but you understand why they're doing them. It's so sensitive and it's so articulate and absolutely brilliant.
Is that event at Serenity?
Yeah, that's
I
right.
love Serenity. Serenity isn't too far from me.
Looking forward to it. I can't wait.
They're great. They are wonderful. I had them on the podcast last summer, and
Brilliant.
Yes, I absolutely adore Kelly, Chris, and David. They're all wonderful at what they do. So, you said that's next week?
It's on Tuesday.
Oh my goodness! Okay,
I'm very much looking forward to it and can't wait to meet Rosie Kelly and talk about her book. It's the problem with these events when there's other people. I just want to sit there and ask them about their book and then answer questions myself. I'm like, I just want to hear them.
That sounds wonderful, and you've definitely put that book on my radar. I have heard about it, but you've given me the nudge to pick it up, so thank you. Before we do get onto your book, I want to ask you about your writing journey, because I was really interested by your acknowledgements in this book. You say a second novel is a whole new voyage. What did you mean by that?
It's like when bands have second albums, I think. You spend 10 years writing the first one slowly and meticulously, and then you have to write a second one much more swiftly. And I felt like the journey to get to Heatstroke, my first novel being published, was this epic odyssey, this enormous adventure that involved so many different phases. And then The Drownings I wrote comparatively pretty quickly, and the process was much swifter and slicker in ways, but also a lot more daunting because you know what publication looks like and you feel like you're responding to the first book you've written and you want to take things in different directions, and it felt sort of more complicated and more straightforward at the same time.
And how's it felt, like, how's the reception felt with this book?
It's so different because Heatstroke came out in May 2020, it was just past the shock of the beginning of COVID and
Yeah.
was in that bit where we were just getting bored. It had been a couple of months and everyone was still, didn't know where it was going. No one
Yeah.
knew that a year later things would be, at least to some degree, back to a level of normality. And it just felt odd. So
Yeah.
I never experienced, I think I saw the hardback in a bookshop once and there's a picture of me wearing a mask standing next to it, doing a thumbs
Oh,
up, not being able to speak to anybody. And there was that week in the middle of March 2020 where every single event that had been planned, every festival, everything fell out of my diary. And it's actually kind of an amazing time because the book bloggers and the event people and the reviewers, everyone just jumped into action, and this entirely new calendar of events sprang into life, which was phenomenal. And so much of it was amazing and reached very different people in different ways. And it was such a privilege in so many ways to be part of that.
mhm.
Equally, I didn't get to see a 3D human when I discussed that book once, which just felt so, I'd been looking forward to that
Yeah,
aspect
of
of it so much.
course.
So what's been amazing with the Drownings is to meet people and be in places and meet other writers as well who I'd only spoken to online, maybe on Zoom calls and things. So it's just been a very different experience, and one that I'm so pleased to have had as well. It's felt like all the things I was looking forward to, I've now actually seen come to fruition.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so happy that you've been able to have lots of lovely events and actually seen people face to face for this one, because
Beautiful.
lockdown just felt like a different beast, didn't it? It feels like a different lifetime.
It feels like it didn't happen. It feels like we made it up, like it's a strange film we all watched. But it was such an unusual time to be doing such a massive life event as
Mhm.
launching a debut. I didn't have a book launch. I did have a book launch, but it was just all of my friends and family in little tiny boxes on a screen, which again had its own magic. It was beautiful
Yeah.
to have those people who might not be able to travel for things all being there. But my goodness, it was nice with the Drownings to actually get in a room in a Waterstones and have a really nice time. So it's felt lovely to get a second chance to try all those things.
Yeah, that's great. I remember Bookstagram completely blew up around lockdown. It was, yeah, everyone was posting pictures of books online. I remember seeing Heatstroke on there so many times. It was really popular online. So, I mean, it has its positives, I guess, because there was this wonderful bookish community. And I suppose,
No one had much else to do, so there
yeah,
was lots of chance to read books,
this
albeit
is true.
not on the beaches we'd all imagined, but
Yeah.
in back gardens and balconies.
This is true. I did spend a lot of time. I mean, we were quite lucky with the weather that summer, to be fair, thank God.
Goodness, it was like a blessing. That
Yeah,
April was just gorgeous, thank
we
goodness.
needed it. But let's get into the drownings, because there's so much that I want to ask you. But to start, could you give the listeners your kind of elevator pitch for the drownings?
Absolutely. The Drownings tells the story of a young woman called Serena, who was a championship competitive swimmer, like was hoping for the Olympics. She has a catastrophic injury that ends her career and then finds herself on an incredibly atmospheric, slightly dark Northern University campus where her cousin, Zara, who is an Instagram influencer, is also studying. They both get swept up by a charismatic lecturer called Jane, who is obsessed with what happened on that campus hundreds of years ago, which was witch trials. So she teaches them about that, and they begin to make connections between the way the women who were murdered as witches were treated and the way women are treated today. And it sparks anger in them, it sparks them into protest and into rage, and things get very out of hand.
I think that is the perfect description for this book. To start us off, I want to ask you about the setting of the book. Obviously, it's a campus novel, and I was curious whether campus novels are something you've always been drawn to in terms of reading, or whether it was something that was specific to writing this story that drew you to it.
Usually it was the setting that came to me first for this book, and then it was populated. I mean, I love a campus novel. I think I've read The Secret History 50 times,
Wow.
every autumn. Okay, that's at least 10. Every autumn, that's my go-to book. I absolutely love it. And I'd always wanted to set something on a campus. And my partner works in academia, and I didn't go to a campus university. I actually wrote The Drownings back in my own old university town, which was amazing and full of the ghosts of my own teenage and early 20s self. But he was at Nottingham, actually, a beautiful campus. And he was doing a conference there. He said, come and stay in the hotel with me after the conference dinner. So I'm like, sure, got the train down. This is going to be a lovely walk through a beautiful campus. About an hour and a half later, I'm still wandering around this campus. Google Maps sees it as nothing but grey space or ether. And it was genuinely unsettling. Campuses are often, Nottingham's beautiful. A lot of them are they're almost like woodlands, and almost this one turned into sort of like a fairy tale woodland in which I was walking around. I was like, what's this building before? Every building looked like is it a library? Is it a canteen? Is it a halls of residence? There was almost no one around, and they were all so busy and in their own worlds. And I just wandered around and thought, this is deeply uncanny. Like, this is a really strange, removed space. And campuses have that thing of loads of people who are all the same age, all like on the brink of adulthood at this incredible moment of their lives where they're learning so much and they're so porous to the world, but also so full of all the passion and fear and adventure and awkwardness that comes with being that age. And then you're put in this space that's kind of removed. Like, they tend to have like two shops, and they're like close to a town, but they're not in the town. And these strange, like, they become these like universes, these closed off. And the campus I invented for The Drownings, Lewisham, is genuinely cut off. It's sort of quite hard to get to deliberately, because I wanted it to feel like this, like, removed, quite remote.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Space where you could honestly believe things could happen that are out of the ordinary.
Yeah, it does have that surreal sort of magical quality to it. I don't know if magical is the right word, but it's got that otherworldly feel to it. Do you know what I mean? And I was really curious because your protagonist, Serena, builds this relationship with a woman from the university, a lecturer, who is this woman called Jane, and she teaches Serena about the sort of dark history of the land that their campus is built on. Could you tell us about what inspired that?
I was living in Oxford. This is around the time I was writing, was the time that the statue was pulled down in Bristol, around the time there was the Roads Must Fall campaign in Oxford. And I liked the idea of reappraising. We put up statues, they're not neutral, they're not born of the earth, they're put up by people to place someone in a higher position because of what they've done. And it's absolutely right, I believe, that we should challenge that and say, well, I don't think, basically, we shouldn't make statues of humans because all humans are fallible. We should make statues of, I don't know, animals or rainbows or something. But you put a human up, you're putting that human above other people and asking people to walk beneath that statue on a daily basis and be okay with what it represents is rightfully deemed unreasonable. And I like the idea of reassessing and reappraising. There's an amazing company based out of Oxford called Uncomfortable Oxford, which talks about the truth of the buildings. Like, people built those buildings and they were more often than not enslaved people. And if we don't acknowledge that that's the case, that that's built into the bricks and the stones of the place, it's its truth, it's its history. We can ignore that and pretend it's just incredibly beautiful, which it is, but it also has this blood and this darkness behind it. And I liked the idea. And one of my favorite things I loved living in a student town. Students are great. They do challenge, they do think. They're in that stage of their life where everything's up for grabs. And I find them genuinely inspiring, seeing the protests they were having, seeing the conversations they were having, and the sheer eloquence with which the young people were challenging norms, I thought was incredible, and wanted to tell a similar story, less about how stones were put in place and more about like what can be baked into the earth of a place, and can we ever deny the truth of the ground that we walk upon.
Yes, this is so true. I really love everything that you've just said. I think, yes, you can acknowledge the beauty of somewhere, but you also need to acknowledge the history and what has happened in order for that thing to be created. I think it's really important to acknowledge that. There is also the witch trials, which is one of the things that Serena learns about through Jane. And I was curious what the research process was like behind the witch trials in the book.
Historical research is fascinating, and essentially you could do it for the rest of your life and never stop. And I think as a writer, you have to almost learn there's a certain point you need to get to where you've got enough. And I listened to online lectures, podcasts, just basically sought out people who'd frankly done that research on my behalf and knew what they were talking about. I actually wrote it into a lecture. We see Jane for the second time standing at the front of a lecture hall. And I wanted to give it that much space in the book that this information was given to the reader as it's given, and we see Serena respond to it. And historical research is really fascinating. When I was doing the Curtis Brown course, my tutor on that was the wonderful Erin Kelly, who does a huge amount of research for her novels. They're all set in these amazing asylums and things, and there's all this wonderful learning that comes with it. And she gave the advice, I think Stephen King gives this advice as well, which is don't make notes when you're writing, which is completely counterintuitive. Like, I want to scribble down every single detail, but if you don't, what you remember is the really great stuff, is the really juicy bits, the bits that, because like, it's a novel. It needs to have truth, but it doesn't need to be 100% detailed, accurate. I was making up a story. Every story told in it is based on reality, but not entire reality. So I made up a story about a woman who'd lived on those grounds and had been killed, had been murdered as a witch.
Is that Gilly Sampson?
Absolutely, Gilly Sampson. Her story isn't real. It's an amalgam of various stories. I just basically put together the bits that sounded the best, that I remembered, that stuck in my brain as those nuggets of gold after having listened and read. And I think I wrote down dates and things like that, but the rest of it I tried to go by that advice, which was just trust yourself. And if you find it exciting and interesting, it's probably something that a reader will find interesting and exciting.
I mean, her story felt incredibly real to me, so I was convinced it was a true story.
Based on several that I sort of amalgamed together.
Was there any particular trials that you were interested in whilst doing your research? Was there any specific ones that you were like, really surprised by, really, I don't know, that really struck you?
I listened to an amazing lecture by a young academic, actually, which was about, and I include some of it in Jane's lecture, some of the ideas they were playing with. The thing that really struck me wasn't necessarily an individual story, but how involved the clergy were. That if you go to the churches around that area, and some of these records still exist, you can see the sermons they were giving. Absolutely shocking. Like the level of control and the level of using these ideas from King James's demonology, etc., using these ideas of the dark arts as basically simply a way to control people and a way especially to control women. And these women who were stepping out of line in the most minute of ways, in ways that we absolutely wouldn't think was anything bar being slightly high-spirited, challenging a man. Suddenly, the clergy would back this case against them. And I was genuinely horrified by some of it. Like, we know these stories are awful, but to read snippets of these sermons and to know how these male clergy members were using that to control the women and the people in their parishes was really fascinating and really solidified for me. That's what I wanted to write about.
I mean, it's something that, witch trials always fascinate me because it's like, this is something that happened like, I don't know, 400 years ago. And the treatment of women globally now, it's not entirely dissimilar, and obviously it's worse in certain areas, but
one of the things, it should feel absolutely unthinkable, and it kind of doesn't. It resonates in a way. And again, I wanted to play with that in the book, this idea that it does feel like there is a contemporary relevance to it, wouldn't it be wonderful if we didn't feel that, if it felt like this horrific thing we could never imagine happening again.
Yeah, that's so true. And when we did the event at Blackwell's, obviously that event was called Rage and Revenge, and we spoke a lot at that event about those two themes. But I wanted to ask you about the rage element because it is so apparent in this book and you really do lean into it. But as I've just said, rightfully so, it's something that it's still so prevalent in society, the way women are treated. Has writing this book changed your relationship towards that feeling of rage?
And I think it is a case of, if you're not furious, you're not paying attention.
Yes.
It is utterly valid. It is righteous to feel that way. And I think rage is a really fascinating topic. I think it can be terrifying. And certainly male rage is something that I think we all actually live in fear of in some ways.
Yeah.
Female rage is really interesting as well because it's suppressed, it's oppressed, if anything. We're not really allowed to express it. There aren't really routes for us to do that. I think that's why we're seeing so many books and so many songs and films and things that focus on it, because we're supposed to be placid and amenable and polite and acquiescent. And this rage builds and it burns. And it made me, when I started writing about it, I assumed the rage would be negative, that rage is an expression of, it's been triggered by something terrible.
Mm-hmm.
It's better if we don't feel it. Wouldn't it be lovely if it all just felt fantastic? And therefore, rage is this horrible surge. And then you sort of realize actually something that's been oppressed to that extent, the release can feel incredible and it can feel almost close to unity in some ways. I think it can unite us to the women of the past who I hope felt that as well. I'm sure they did. It can unite us to other women and it can unite us to parts of ourselves that we're meant to keep quiet and meant to keep down. And suddenly we're allowed or allow ourselves create that permission to have that fury. There are several moments in the book where characters scream on a beach. And I think we all know what that desire feels like. Why don't we all want to do that quite really? I completely understand the desire to scream on a beach, just let it out. And we think about harpies and furies and these mythical women who expressed this emotion. We've needed an outlet for this throughout history. And I think there is something slightly ancient and potentially beautiful about that expression and that sense of sort of release, the lap of the Medusa, the jouissance that comes with, like, I'm allowed to connect to this part of myself that is squashed, and to do that with other women. There's a scene in the book where the women scream on a beach together. And I've never done that, but I'd really like to.
I mean, that scene is so incredible. It's incredibly cinematic. It's really visceral, and the women gather at the beach. For the listeners, these women gather at the beach, and there's primal screaming, and there's dancing, and there's fire, and it's just kind of electric, that feeling that you create. And I'm wondering when we can make this happen.
To the book launch. This is really foolish. I went to Islington Waterstones, which is lovely, but screaming on a beach would have been amazing.
I'm down for this.
Set a date.
I'm ready when you are, Hazel. I am.
Fantastic. I'm well up for it.
I want to speak about the use of elements in this book, specifically with water and fire. It's something that's always kind of intrigued me, and I don't know enough about the elements and how we kind of connect to them. And I don't know if you know much about them, but I found the use of fire and how it links to female rage so powerful, but also your use of water as well. And I was wondering if you could tell us about your exploration of those elements and whether it was a conscious thing.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Came first because I knew I wanted Serena to be a swimmer. Someone told me a story once about a relative of theirs who was a championship swimmer, and I thought no more of it, and then couldn't get the image out of my head of swimming. And I wanted to play with different types of water. There are 3 sort of quite distinct different types of water in the book. There's the river that runs through the university where the women were murdered. There's the sea that it flows into, hence the beach with the screaming. And there's also the swimming pool. And I love the idea of playing with what water can mean in those different ways. Like, you have this water that has been, and right at the beginning of the book, nearly takes a life.
Yes.
Like, it is deathly. It is water's incredibly dangerous. It can kill us. And there's another occasion where someone again nearly faces death in the ocean this time. And these very wild types of water that we can't control versus the swimming pool, which is absolutely temperature controlled and chemically controlled and put within lines, but still has that power to an extent. I like the idea of Serena having a relationship with that water that wasn't her controlling it. She had to sort of submit to it as a swimmer. And this idea that whatever we do with water, it has potency and a spirit of its own that we can't dampen. And the same with fire. It's long been used, I think, as an image for women's rage and women's frustrations, from Jane Eyre to Rebecca. And I think it makes complete sense as that is uncontrollable. It is something that warms us and destroys destroys us and can get out of hand so easily.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to zone in on Serena being involved in the world of competitive swimming. I wanted to ask if you would talk about, the research behind that and whether, you spoke to anybody that was in that world. Yeah, what was that writing process like?
I have no background in the local swimming baths and centre parks. It's not something that I've ever done. But I'm not someone who's particularly interested in sport. Like, if someone said to me, "You've got to watch a basketball game," I'd laugh. But I will happily watch 10 hours of a documentary about basketball. Like, documentaries are one of my great loves. And I think as a writer, if you have an obsession, you just follow the obsession. Take it, like, let it take you. It will lead you to interesting things. And I watch hours of documentaries about sports and barely watch it till the Olympics when it's completely overwhelming. And it's so fascinating. It's such a weird thing to do. The obsession, the dedication, the discipline it demands is extraordinary. And you may or may not get results. You watch the Olympics and we're told to be inspired by it. Often all I can think about are the hundreds of tens of thousands of people who wanted to be there but didn't make it, that didn't make the cut in their own countries and whatever sort of leads they have to do to get there. And you think there's so many broken dreams at the feet of it. And that overwhelms me. I love the idea of looking at what it demands of people, and swimming especially. Swimming is the one you have to get up at the crack of dawn. Swimming is the one you can't practice at home. You have to go to this pool and sort of give it your devotion, give it your worship almost. There felt like there was a religious element slightly to it's water, it's cleansing, it's a baptism. And it was fascinating to learn like the technical parts of a stroke. I can swim different strokes very rudimentarily. It was fascinating to learn. Breaststroke is, if you put a baby in water, it will do a version of breaststroke. It's ancient. It's sort of in our inherited muscle memory to be able to do this stroke. And then looking at absolutely crazy levels of detail. It's a really clumsy stroke. You have to heave yourself out of the water so you lose time. So everything's about pulling back fractions of a second. And I got deeply involved in listening to YouTube videos and rewatching things and reading Swimmer's World magazine, which is really boring if you're not trying to learn about swimming, or if you're not swimming, but amazing if you are, and trying to really inhabit this level of detail that is so relevant and so necessary to it. How the sheer glory and despair that can be held within these races last seconds, essentially, a couple of minutes. Everything rests upon it. And there's nothing in my life, thank goodness, that's so, as writers, we do sacrifice things, but not at 5:30 in the morning, my goodness. And this sense of what are people willing to give for a dream, for an ambition, for whatever it might be.
Yeah, I mean, discipline is the perfect word in all of that. She really does have to be incredibly disciplined. And I was really fascinated by the dynamic between her and her coach, because you can tell that he knows how great, like he knows her potential, just like her mum knows her potential, but he's almost like this kind of oppressive presence in the book. And I wondered what you felt their dynamic represented.
I think it's fascinating with sport. You've got these three people essentially, in the coach, the mother, and Serena herself, all wanting the same thing, which feels like it should push in the same direction. But it's Serena's body that has to do that. It's Serena, it falls to her. And at this point, she's a child. And often with sports, you have to get good way before an age we would normally ask anyone to do anything particularly impressive. Like when I was that age, I was just, watching telly and reading books, but she's being asked to take on, and that tension between supporting somebody and helping them, but actually the pressure of that support is immense. And for Serena, it destroys her in certain ways. It robs her of the life she may have lived. And I like the idea that she arrives in that campus so much younger in some ways than everyone else around her, because she hasn't lived the formative years. She hasn't drunk alcohol, because absolutely the sugar alone would have been a no-no. There's no way she could have had, it would have ruined 2 days worth of practices. And this sense of, how do you go from having this childhood that is incredibly regimented and disciplined and restricted to being, she's 20 when she arrives on the campus, to living the life of a normal student? There's discipline involved. You have to turn up to your lectures, but aside from that, it's a moment of explosion of freedom.
Yes.
And she doesn't know how to do that. And I love the idea that these people wanted to help her. That's absolutely, there was no sense of doing harm, but that doesn't mean that harm's not done.
Yeah, and when she arrives at the uni, she's so confused by that freedom. She doesn't understand what to do with it, whereas her cousin, who is at the same university, Zara, as you said before, she's an Instagram influencer. She is totally different in terms of being able to navigate a social life. You know, she's very popular. She's got a massive following on Instagram. She's really good at, you know, being involved with boys and going to parties and doing makeup, and, you know, social presentation skills are great. I should say as well, we have between chapters, we have Zara's Instagram posts. And I was really curious about the role of a body positive influencer and the sort of contrast between Serena and Zara.
Both of their bodies are incredibly important. They look chalk and cheese. You know, Serena's tall and broad and incredibly lean and muscular, and Zara is lush and, you know, beautifully sort of excess with her, where Serena has no excess. But you have this physical difference, but their bodies have both been almost traded in for something. I like the idea they've both given their bodies to whatever it might be. So Serena has honed her body into a machine, essentially, and has to unlearn all of that and relearn it as a vessel for pleasure and for presentation and for all the other things a body can be. And Zara, who is much more in touch with her body in that sense, but has put it online and expresses at some points that it feels like she's given so much access to it, it's not quite hers anymore, and that people have imbued both of those bodies with meanings that the owners of those bodies, that the people within those bodies may or may not have complete control of. And I like the idea that whilst their lives have been vastly different in so many ways, they've both made that strange deal where they've traded in something and maybe get something back, but maybe it's not quite what they hoped for.
Yeah, that's so true. I just find social media fascinating in general, and what the experience must be of somebody being an influencer and how much you feel you've got to share of yourself. I mean, I just do the podcast Instagram, and that already feels like, you know, it's a lot of pressure to have to put things out on a regular basis. But Zara does it almost daily, and she's sharing so many personal things about herself. I just can't imagine what that'd be like.
Eyes looking at parts of you, that there's a bit where Serena scrolls through and it almost feels like she's looking at an ex, like she knows that bodies as well as you might know a body you've known intimately. And there are influencers, I think, goodness, I know them, I know so much of, I know nothing of them, I've never met them, they're not, you do feel like, and there is a sense of potentially a sense of not quite ownership, but of involvement, and of, you do feel connected in a way that you wouldn't if they didn't. And I don't think we have grasped yet the implications of what this is and what that can do to you. We know what happens to people who become famous, and it tends to not go well. And yet we have this on these micro levels all the time where there is choice, but after a point, is there?
Yeah, I mean, parasocial relationships are just so strange.
Strange.
You really
So
feel
petrifying.
like, yeah, it is. I do want to ask you, this sort of has to do with social media, but you highlight a really important topic in the book, and I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler. We can remove it if it is, but the subject of images being shared without somebody's consent, and how it's often the victim of that act that's blamed, which just makes me so angry in and of itself. But why was it important to you to write about that?
Right, about the idea of consent. I think consent's a topic we talk about a lot, and it feels like it should be clear cut, and it definitely isn't. I think there are times where it's very clear cut, I hasten to add, but I think there are times where it is nuanced. There's a scene between Serena and a boy fairly early on in the book, where it's the first time she's been alone with a boy. And there's a tension to should he pick up on signals that maybe he's not picking up on, and where does consent sit there? And I wanted to play with that and the idea of images being shared, taken, used against people. It feels such an enormous violation and such a terrible thing, and something we actually see quite a lot of, I think. And in this case, an image is used. And I wanted to sort of play with the idea of it, that it's used, its intention is malicious. It's intended to sort of bring somebody down. And actually, the person the image is taken of takes back some of that control and sort of looks at it and thinks, it looks fantastic. You know, I can see the spirit of power and of joy within it. And the idea that actually it is more complicated, and it is a horrific violation. But actually, in this case, I wanted to play with the idea of that backfiring in some ways, and it being something that felt like a form of power, and I wanted to I play with the idea of power, I hope, quite a lot in the book, that things that can feel like empowerment, well, they're not empowerment unless somebody's giving you power, and that almost never happens. But this sense of what we think power is, how we feel power plays out, and how it can feel to have that and have that taken from you.
Yeah, I really loved that you allowed her to have that reaction, that it was, she kind of reclaimed that immediately and was like, I look great. I was like, yes, I love that. There was no shame from her whatsoever, and there shouldn't be. Nobody should be able to do something like that and then you feel the shame about it. So
Absolutely. And I hoped that sort of showed, it's just fairly late on in the book, she's got to a place where she can take that, and
yeah.
she has that power within her to go, no, all is well.
Exactly. This is an incredibly powerful book. I absolutely loved it. I do want to ask you, Hazel, what is next for you?
I have some ideas at the moment around sort of set slightly further back in the past, albeit about 20, 25 years, so early 2000s,
Oh,
and in the
amazing.
world of music, which is,
Love this.
yeah, well, I've never swum, I've never played an instrument, but I'm drawn to these things. So I'm currently in the deep research phase of essentially looking back. The Drownings is set essentially in the modern day. So I'm writing it as a woman in her 40s looking back. And I like the idea of going back to when my youth was and telling those stories.
I love that so much. Oh my God, I'm so excited for this. Fingers crossed, because anything can happen, can't it, during the writing process?
Absolutely.
But I am really excited for more work from you. I would love to ask you, I want to ask you two things. I'm going to be really sneaky. I want to ask, before I ask for the recommendation, I would love to know what your writing influences are. Are there any authors or books that you've really carried with you through your own writing journey?
Really interesting. Writer I most turn to is a writer who writes in kind of a slightly different genre. It's Megan Abbott, who writes,
Yes.
who's a thriller writer essentially. Although I think her books aren't really. I think you could take out the thriller elements, and what you're left with is this nuanced, delicious, dark tale of human motivations. And I've read all of her books several times, and there's a new one coming out next month, and I can't wait. And I absolutely love her work. So I think when I wrote Heatstroke, she has a book called The End of Everything, which has a very similar energy to that book. And it was that energy I absolutely wanted to capture. So her ability to conjure atmosphere is the thing I would love to be able to do. So she's probably the writer I take with me into each book.
I love that so much. I don't think I've read that one, so I'll have to add it
Wonderful.
to my list. But before I let you go, Hazel, I do like to end on a recommendation. So that can be anything, books, TV, films, anything goes for this one. What would you like to recommend?
For a book, I'm going to do that slightly annoying thing of picking a book that I have a proof of. So this isn't out until August, but
That's
it's
okay.
Katie Bishop's second novel, High Season. And I
Amazing.
loved Katie Bishop's first book, actually. And I think I prefer this one, which is saying something. It's a tale of memory. Like, how do we remember things? What is memory? How reliable is it? And it's dark, but it's set in this incredibly glittering, glamorous world. So it's just lovely to delve into all of that. I love something that feels glamorous and elegant and wonderful, but actually is dark and sordid. So I read it in about 2 days, absolutely gobbled it. Totally brilliant. A wonderful summer book.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, that's the perfect one to take on holiday and fly through on the beach, isn't
Absolutely.
it? Thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy chatting to you again, Hazel. Thank you for coming on the
Thank
podcast.
you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Where can the listeners find you online?
Hazel Barkworth on Instagram.
Amazing. And for listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. You can follow us at A Pair of Bookends Pod on Instagram and at A Pair of Bookends on Twitter and TikTok. You can also find us for extra content on Patreon and Substack now, which is at Hannah's Reads and Rambles. And lastly, you can grab yourselves a copy of The Drownings and Hazel's debut novel, Heatstroke. I'll be popping a link in the show notes for both of those. And you can follow Hazel via her Instagram, which is also in the show notes. But lastly, thank you again, Hazel, and thank you, listeners, for listening. Goodbye.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.